Jack turned the key and pushed open the heavy oak door. It was 6 o'clock in the evening. He was usually still in the office at this time, but the meeting had been canceled, and he had decided to surprise his wife by buying her favorite latte and running home early. A pair of men's size 10 sneakers lay in the hallway. He froze, as if his eyes refused to believe what they were seeing. "Okay," he exhaled and quietly put the bag of coffee on the nightstand. Muffled moans came from the bedroom, so intimate it was as if the house itself had momentarily become alien. The sound was stolen, too personal to be heard by anyone else. His body reacted before his mind could process it. Heat flared in his chest, as if a hot coal had been thrown in, his palms instantly sweating, his fingers clenching into fists. Jack froze in the hallway, taking in every detail, breathing stifled sighs, the soft creaking of springs under the weight of alien bodies. He slowly, almost ceremonially, pushed the door, as if he knew that everything would collapse behind it. On the white, perfectly ironed bedspread, there was a frozen fragment, as if torn from someone else's film, a frame he would never want to see. Maggie, his wife, the same girl he had stood at the altar with just 2 years ago, whom he had kissed under the rustle of wedding bells, was now kneeling before a strange man. His naked body was covered in tattoos. One in particular was striking an inscription on his collarbone, half erased like an old vow. Jack did not immediately understand what exactly he was seeing. Everything happened in his mind as if in slow motion, even the air seemed thicker. "What the voice broke off like a broken string. Maggie shuddered as if an electric current had run down her spine. The guy with the tattoo jerked back, released her thighs, and reached for his jeans, which lay in a lump at the foot of the bed. The room fell into a stupid, ringing silence in which even her breath sounded like thunder. The smell, a mixture of Maggie's perfume, sweat, and something alien, stung her nostrils like mold. Jack took a step forward. "If you've got hope, go away. Right now." His voice was even, almost icy, but there was a threat pulsing through it. The stranger froze, gathering his thoughts, as if he wanted to explain something, but meeting Jack's cold, dead gaze seemed to suck the words out of him. He pulled a t-shirt over his naked body, grabbed his sneakers from the hallway, stumbling with each step, as if he was afraid to turn his back. "No offense, bro," he muttered and, avoiding eye contact, disappeared behind the door. There was a silence, tense as a nerve. It was as if unspoken words were stuck in the air, and even the clock in the hallway seemed to have stopped ticking. There was a ring on the carpet at his feet, an engagement ring, thin and made of white gold. Jack leaned over and picked it up with 2 fingers, holding it like evidence. The metal was warm, as if it still absorbed the heat of betrayal. "It's strange what temperature symbols take on when they stop meaning anything," he thought, squeezing the ring like torture. It suddenly felt heavy not in weight, but in meaning. Maggie stood by the bed, a shirt thrown over her shoulders, someone else's or her own, Jack didn't know. The buttons were unbuttoned, and there was a mark on her chest from someone else's lips. She looked confused and vulnerable, but there was no fear in her eyes, only a mixture of guilt and some kind of dull submission. "Jack," she whispered, her voice shaking, but not from shame, rather from the realization of the inevitability. It happened. By chance? He threw the ring on the dresser, like a useless trifle. The sound of metal hitting wood echoed in his temples. "Let's do it without sugar. We haven't seen each other much in the last 2 months. You've been at work all the time. I felt like we were, well, losing touch." Her voice became plaintive, and she took a step forward, as if the distance between them could be physically closed. "And you decided to restore it by sleeping with a first person who showed you a tattoo and smiled at you at a bar." He shook his head, as if he couldn't believe he was saying it out loud. "That's amazing logic." He looked at her as if she were a stranger. Everything that had happened between them, evening conversations in the kitchen, kisses in taxis, sleepy embraces, suddenly seemed like an illusion. And outside the window it continued to rain, and the drops on the glass seemed as cold as her name was now in his memory. She pressed her hands to her face. Her fingers were shaking. Jack noticed for the first time how dull her nails looked without a salon manicure. And for some reason, he remembered their first trip to San Diego, when she had laughed at the waves and her signature lollipops. Something inside him twisted painfully, physically. He walked into the kitchen, barely aware of his footsteps beneath him. His ears were ringing as if he had just walked out of a loud club, only instead of music, there was the roar of his own life shattering into pieces. His brain demanded simple, elementary actions, almost rituals. Open the refrigerator, take out a bottle of water, take a sip. Cold, that's what he wanted to feel now. Something real, controlled. His hand shook as he turned the lid. He took a few sips, the water went down his throat like ice, but the heat inside didn't subside. Footsteps sounded behind them, soft, like a cat's. Maggie. She pulled her shirt down the rest of the way, holding it to her chest, and walked into the kitchen as if it were an ordinary evening, like hundreds of others, when they ate dinner together or argued over who was doing the dishes. "Don't be silent, Jack. Talk to me, please." Her voice trembled, but there was still hope in it, like a weak flame that was not allowed to go out. He didn't turn around. He just glanced out the window. Behind the glass, the gray evening was smoothly turning into night. The windows of the houses opposite were flashing with warm light, and in each apartment, it seemed, there was a normal, whole life. "Do you want to hear it?" "Okay." He pushed back his chair and sat down. His movements were slow, as if he was afraid to wake something inside. "I'm filing for divorce. I think it's fair, for both of us." Maggie went pale, then flushed to the roots of her hair, as if shame had suddenly slapped her cheeks. She sat down opposite him, drawing her legs up to her chest, like a child who wanted to hide inside herself. Her nails dug into the skin of her hands, and Jack noticed how white her knuckles were. "Is this final?" she whispered, avoiding his gaze. "Are you wondering now if you can get out of this?" He grinned. The smile was more like a spasm. "I'll say it straight. Yes, definitely." She didn't answer right away. She just started crying. The tears weren't violent and weren't accompanied by screams or hysterics. They flowed down her face smoothly and silently, as if someone was pouring transparent paint on her from the inside. Jack looked at her and suddenly realized that he felt nothing. No anger, no desire to blame, no pain. Only fatigue. Deep, viscous, like the silt at the bottom of an old pond. "We rushed into marriage," he managed to say. "At the time, it seemed like a normal risk. You know, like taking out a mortgage or quitting your job to start your own. It was all a game then. We thought love was an everlasting resource. But it turned out to be like gasoline. It ran out, we stalled." Maggie was silent, only shrinking tighter. She brushed away a tear, but another one immediately appeared on her cheek. I I can move in with my mom until things calm down. I don't want to make things worse," she whispered, not looking up. "I think it's better this way," he nodded. "Not for long, until we decide everything." The silence thickened. The muffled wail of sirens could be heard from outside the window. An ambulance was driving by somewhere. For a second, it seemed as if even the city was holding its breath. "I didn't mean to, Jack," she suddenly exhaled. It, it didn't happen because I don't love you. I just felt like you didn't need me anymore. You left early, came back late. Everything became like we didn't have you. I even started making coffee for one person." He looked down. His hands lay on the table, straight and tense. He suddenly realized how long it had been since they had touched each other, really. Without haste, without habit. Maybe you should spend the night at Tom's," she suggested, clutching herself in confusion as if she was cold. He shook his head. "This is my house. I bought this house. Every brick, every slab. I will stay here. Today. Tomorrow morning, I will leave for my sister. I will give you time to pack your things. No scene." Maggie nodded, biting her lip. Then suddenly she leaned forward. "I'll pay my share of the mortgage. I don't want you to shoulder it all by yourself. It's fair." "No need." He pushed the empty glass away, and it hit the table dully, like the last period. "We'll simplify everything down to numbers. At the notaries, no scandals, no blackmail, no maybe even. Simple. clean, fast. I'm not going to drag this drama out for months. We burned it, so no need to walk on the ashes." She looked at him, and for the first time he saw something new in her gaze. Understanding. Late, bitter, but real. Her lips trembled, she wanted to say something, but she couldn't. She just nodded, silently. They sat there for a while, as if they were both waiting for someone to come in and say, "Stop. That was a mistake. The scene went wrong, let's reshoot it." But no one came in. Only the clock above the refrigerator clicked, 2200 hours. The end of something. She nodded and disappeared into the bedroom. He walked down to the garage and climbed into the 2019 Mustang he loved almost like his childhood dog. He turned the ignition but didn't move. The music played incongruously, a lazy jazz saxophone that was usually soothing. Today, the sound was annoying, like someone had found the wrong radio. He turned off the stereo and opened the window. The night air smelled of fresh asphalt and spilled gasoline. His phone flashed a notification. Daily reminder, anniversary in 2 weeks. Jack chuckled. Diary, you're a little late. He rubbed his face with his palms and let his thoughts disperse like waves after a stone. In fact, he had lost more than just his wife. He had lost the version of himself that believed that the family boat could weather any storm if they worked hard and loved. The seconds dragged on until the main fact became clear. That version was dead. It was time to build a new one. He got out of the car, slammed the door, and went back up. In the living room were their wedding photos, two people laughing so hard they cried from sheer happiness. Jack took the frame down, but didn't break it. He just put it face down on the shelf. Then he went into the office and pulled out a folder of documents. Divorce, the word rattled like an empty steel ladle, but it couldn't be avoided. The clock struck 9. Jack opened his laptop, found the application form he needed, and began filling in the lines. Reason, irreconcilable differences. His hands were shaking, but his fingers were typing quickly. When he finished, he saved the draft. Paper doesn't scream or cry, paper simply records facts, and that's why it's easier to live with than with emotions. There was a cold pizza and a can of beer in the refrigerator. He sat down on the steps of the terrace and uncorked the lid. The sky above San Jose was empty, except for the plane, which was slowly dying in the sky, its lights blinking. Wherever I go, I'll have to take myself with me, Jack thought, and took a sip. The phone rang. The screen read, Tom Work. He didn't pick it up. He wanted the silence in which he could hear his own breathing and admit, yes, it's all over. But life was only just beginning here. Tomorrow he would get up, make black coffee without sugar, and go to his brother in the north. Then he would find a lawyer, then perhaps rent an apartment in the center and try again to remember what it meant to live for yourself and not for someone else's picture of an ideal family. He finished his beer and stood up. A wooden board creaked. The house seemed alien, a slightly lopsided set. Jack turned off the light, dropped his keys into a ceramic bowl by the door, and went upstairs. The bedroom smelled of someone else's perfume. He opened the window wide, letting the night air wash away the remnants of the stage. Before he lay down, he took his wedding ring out of the box and twirled it between his fingers. A symbol is something we agreed to consider eternal, but the agreement is always two-way. He put the ring in an empty cufflink box and slammed the lid shut. Tomorrow, he said out loud, tomorrow I'll start over. And for the first time in many months, I allowed myself to fall asleep without an alarm clock. 3 days passed. It was 5:40 in the morning when Jack's phone vibrated on his nightstand. He had been sleeping fitfully, fully clothed, still unaccustomed to the empty side of the bed. The number was unfamiliar. The voice on the line was formal and dry. Mr. Walker, this is the Santa Clara Highway Patrol. Are you Emily Walker's next of kin? I'm her brother, said Jack, unaccustomed to his own name. Sir, unfortunately your sister was in an accident on Highway 101. Pause. Is she alive? I'm very sorry. Death occurred on the spot. We need you to come for identification. The words stuck to his brain like a sticker that wouldn't come off without leaving a residue of glue. Jack sat up, trying to breathe, but there seemed to be less air. Maggie woke up, saw his empty gaze, took the phone, found out the address of the morgue, put it down. What's happened? He looked through her. Amy. No, Amy. 15 minutes later, they were on their way to the county coroner's office. The morning was gray as cardboard. The road was still wet from the night's rain. Maggie was holding the wheel. Jack sat next to her, staring into the glove compartment. Jack breathed slowly, she recalled. He obeyed because some kind of instruction was needed. A woman in uniform met them at the entrance. Papers, signatures, the same thing. I understand how hard this is, Mr. Walker. He only nodded. Understanding did not mean relief. His sister's body was covered with a white sheet up to her chin. Her forehead was scratched. Her hair was as disordered as in an old-school photograph. Jack touched her cold palm. Words did not come. Everything inside groaned, but quietly, as if in slow motion. Yes, it's her, he said, and took a step back. At home, Jack locked himself in his office. At first, he sat in a chair, resting his elbows on his knees. Then he stood up, went to the window, sat down again. On the table lay an open divorce form, left from the previous evening. Now the paper seemed alien, a small task from another life. Maggie brewed some strong tea and knocked. Can? He didn't answer, but she came in and put the mug down. You need to drink something warm. We need to cancel all meetings, he said. His voice was dry, as if it were creaking. I'll take care of it. Give me the phones, I'll tell you everything. He held out his smartphone. Maggie left, calling his boss, his lawyer, his church secretary. She spoke quietly, reservedly. She came back every half hour to check if he was alive. At noon, the funeral home sent a price list. Jack couldn't read it. He scooped the papers into a pile, dropped them on the floor. Maggie knelt down next to him, slowly shoving the sheets back, commenting out loud on what was needed: body transport, chapel service, cremation, or earth. Perhaps cremation, she asked. We promised her music at sunset. Live guitar, so a service in the garden. He remembered. Amy liked simple things and wanted her ashes scattered on the pier. That memory hit harder than the death itself. Jack clasped his hands over his head. I'll call their guitarist from college, Maggie said. In the evening, Emily's half-brother sent old photos. Jack scrolled through 2 pictures, Amy in a baseball cap, their trip to Yosemite. He couldn't look any further, so he deleted the notification. Jack, you need to eat, Maggie appeared again. Don't want to. You can't survive on coffee and nicotine alone. Where does nicotine come from? I don't smoke. She reached over and pulled a pack of Marlboros from his shirt. He shrugged. I bought it on the way. Maggie took chicken soup out of the refrigerator, warmed it up, and put the bowl down. Please, at least a few spoons. He ate half of it slowly. For the first time that day, he noticed the taste salty, almost irritating. Thank you, he said. She nodded as if it were a small victory. Night. Jack sat on the porch with a bottle of Jack Daniels. The lighter clicked every 2 minutes, but the cigarette burned and went out because he forgot to take a drag. Maggie came out and threw a blanket over him. Cold. I'm fine. That's not true. He took a sip of whiskey. I can't cope. Amy was the only person who ever thought I was better than I was. You're really good, Jack. He chuckled. The question is, why did you then? Okay, no need. Not today. She stepped down 1 step so she could see his face. We were both wrong. But your pain is more important than our mistakes now. Let me help. What can you do? Bring her back? No. But I can be here while you scream, drink, and remain silent. Silence filled the yard. Jack finally began to cry. No sound, no drama, just tears dripping onto his jeans. Maggie put her hand on his neck. He didn't push her away. At home, the bills from the bureau arrived again. Jack signed: coffin, transport, flowers. Each signature seemed like a nail. By evening, he passed out right on the couch. He woke up because he couldn't breathe. His chest was tight, his fingers were numb. Panic attack. Maggie heard the noise and ran up. Look at me. Inhale for 4, exhale for 6. 1, 2, 3, 4. He gasped for air as if he were underwater. After a minute, his breathing evened out. "I'm here," she repeated. Then she brought a glass of water. Jack drank it, sat down, and buried his face in his palms. "I'm scared," he said. "It's normal. Fear doesn't kill. It's like there's an empty hole inside. We will fill it. Not today, but we will fill it." That evening, the neighbors brought a casserole and left it by the door. Maggie put it in the refrigerator and set a timer to reheat it later. Jack washed his hands at the sink, watching the soap suds wash away the invisible dirt. "I thought," he said, "that until everything settles down, there's no need to rush with the documents." She wiped her palms with a towel. "I'll stay until you feel like you're standing on your feet. We'll sort it out after the funeral. Okay? But if you want to speed it up, just say so." The night before the ceremony, the house was quiet. Jack walked into Amy's room, which they had temporarily cleared for bouquets. Dozens of lilies and daisies filled the air with a heavy scent. He remembered their conversation in the winter. Lilies smell like a hospital. She laughed and swore that there would be only sunflowers at her wedding. He sank to the floor. Maggie sat down next to him. "Tell me something about Amy." Jack took the album off the shelf. "At the age of 9, she took my first laptop apart to wash the fan. I thought I'd kill her. But an hour later, she put it all back together and added more thermal paste than necessary. The computer overheated within a day. We laughed and soldered together. That's how I became an engineer." He smiled for the first time in many days. "Well, hold on to this," Maggie said, touching his shoulder. "Funeral in the morning. A tent in the garden of the funeral home. Sunny, clear sky." Jack stood at the microphone, his hands shaking, but his voice steady. "Amy saw the best in people. I'll have to live to prove she wasn't wrong." After the speech, the acoustic "Here Comes the Sun" played her favorite. As the last note faded, Jack felt something inside him click. The pain didn't go away, but it showed its limits, as if the darkness had been illuminated by a weak flashlight. Maggie hugged him as the guests began to leave. "We did it," she said. He nodded. "Thank you for not letting go. I'm not holding your hand. I'm here as long as you need me." He looked at her. The past grievances had not disappeared, but were now muted. "We'll talk about everything later," he said. "Right now, I want to go home." In the evening, they sat on the porch. Jack drank water instead of whiskey. The moon rose over the rooftops. "I'm breathing," he said. "That's already a victory." "Yes. Tomorrow, we'll wake up and breathe some more. Let's do it that way." He leaned his shoulder against the door frame. Maggie covered his hand with hers, no promises, no conditions. Just a gesture. He squeezed her fingers, and in that simple, unpoetic silence, they both knew. There was much pain and talk ahead, but the first step after the blow had been taken. Jack woke up the morning after the funeral at the same hour as always, but the room was strange. He dressed mechanically, a t-shirt, jeans, sneakers. Maggie was standing in the kitchen, holding 2 mugs of coffee. "I'll go get Amy's things," he said by way of greeting. "Okay? I can help. One needs to." He took the keys to the Mustang, drove to his sister's apartment, and walked up to the 3rd floor. It still smelled of lavender, the same air freshener she kept in the hallway. Jack opened the closet. Cans of paint, rolls of soundproofing, a tiny sink in a box. Next to it was a set of keys with a keychain shaped like a small van. His sister had dreamed of converting an old 1997 Ford Econoline into a camper and driving to the Pacific Ocean as soon as she saved up enough money. The plan was stuck in someday later. Jack sat down on the wooden box, twirling the key on his finger. He saw himself from the outside, a man in his early 30s, with nowhere to put his hands and thoughts. The van was a job Amy hadn't finished, so he could at least finish the trip. Jack came home for dinner. Maggie was drying the plates. "I took her van," he said, placing the keys on the table. "Is this the rusty white one?" "Yes. It's placed near her complex. I'd like to bring it here and outline a work plan." She nodded. "Okay? You know how I feel about long trips, but do what feels right. Maggie paused, then added, I'm still here. Not because I'm afraid to leave, but because you need yourself alive. I understand. He looked up. For the first time in the days since the tragedy, they were speaking calmly, without explosions. I need a road, Meg. I don't know where. Just keep driving until I start hearing my own thoughts. How long will you be on the road? I don't know. A week, 2, a month. She took a deep breath. I have a contract until the end of the quarter. I can work remotely. If you want, I can join later. Let's decide when I understand where I'm going. Amy's yard was in an old warehouse district. The van was parked under a canopy, paint peeling, side window taped shut. Jack checked the oil, topped up the coolant, charged the battery with a portable jump starter pack. The engine caught on the third try, made a dull coughing sound, and settled into a smooth idle. On the way home, he stopped at a car wash and brushed off the dirt. Under the layers of dust, a dull blue Econoline logo was visible. On the back door, in a small marker, was written, Amy and Jack Road Trip 2024? For some reason, the question mark hurt more than any date on a tombstone. In the garage, Jack laid out his tools, ratchets, sockets, a screwdriver. He removed the back seats, clearing the space down to the metal ribs. He worked in silence for 15 hours until his back screamed in pain. Maggie came by several times, bringing water, a burrito, then a warm blanket when the temperature dropped. He just nodded. By midnight, the van contained 2 rolled-up mattresses from the guest room, a sleeping bag, a box of provisions, a portable gas stove, and a can of gasoline. Jack washed his hands and went up onto the porch. I'm leaving in the morning, he said. I'll pack you a first aid kit, Maggie replied. Morning. The sky over San Jose had burned to a uniform pale gray. Maggie came out in her robe, handing over a bag. Bandages, ibuprofen, wet wipes, Amy's sunglasses. Call as soon as you get to the first motel. I'll try. But if I don't answer, don't panic. It means there's no connection. Okay? She bit her lip. Come back when you're ready. He hugged her briefly. Then he got behind the wheel and nodded, as if he were about to start a race. The van's engine hummed. Jack pulled out of the driveway and saw Maggie raise her hand. He raised his through the open window and turned onto Highway 101. 11 kilometers. The dashboard rattled, the radio picked up only static. Jack turned off the sound and left himself with the noise of the road. He passed San Mateo, ignoring the signs, turned west and came to the coast. The Pacific Ocean appeared on the right, a broad gray line under a low sky. He stopped at the Devil's Slide observation deck. He got out, inhaled the sea salt. He sat down on the concrete parapet, pulled Amy's checklist out of his pocket. The last item, call Jack about Sunday. Now Sunday was eternal. Jack took the marker and made a check mark next to it. He laughed, the sound breaking into a sharp cough. In the evening, he reached a small campsite near Santa Cruz. The surfer manager took $15 and showed him a place under a canopy of eucalyptus trees. Jack parked the van, spread out a mattress, and opened the side door. The sound of the surf mingled with the smell of his neighbor's roasting corn. He walked down to the beach. His toes sank into the cold, wet sand. The waves sifted through the shells like change in a pocket. Jack sat down and scooped up a handful of sand, letting it spill between his toes. Amy, he said quietly, I don't know where this road leads, but I'll take it for both of us. The wind picked up in the night. The van creaked like an old house. Jack dreamed of a traffic corridor, a highway without end, headlights stretching like white threads. Amy sat in the back seat, her feet on a toolbox. She smiled and said, You always wanted to be a driver. You were just afraid of losing your bearings. He replied, Where to go? She laughed. Anywhere, as long as you don't stand still. Jack woke up from his own sun, listened. Rain was tapping on the roof. He felt the pillow dry. Inhale, exhale. Heart returned to normal. In the morning, he filled up with gas at Capitola and got coffee in a paper cup. They were selling fresh strawberries and oranges in the parking lot. Jack bought a kilo of strawberries. Amy loved them for breakfast and ate half of them standing by the hood. He passed San Luis Obispo and turned onto a narrow road along the vineyards. Truckers were talking on the radio about closing a section of the highway. Jack remembered how he had once wanted to get a job driving a truck after college, but chose an office because of the insurance. At lunch, he stopped at a roadside diner. He ordered a burger and a coffee without sugar. The waitress glanced at the ring on the chain around his neck, a wedding ring. On the road alone? Today, yes. I'd argue. She smiled and went behind the counter. Day 5. The voices on the car radio were already familiar. Jack had learned to tell where someone was by their intonation. In Bakersfield, he picked up the signal of a trucker named Marlon, who was telling him he had quit drinking and had been for 6 months. Jack pressed the button. Hold on, brother. The road is long, but it's still the end. From the heart, my friend. What are you going on? Old Econo. Respect. Such a car either rolls out of love or out of despair. I have both options, Jack said and smiled. The Sierra slopes rose on the horizon. The road promised a pass, and then the Nevada desert. Jack had made no plans, but inside he felt a sense of the route, a thin line that had not been there before. He pressed the gas pedal a little harder. The van responded with a low growl. Jack placed his hand on the empty passenger seat, as if he felt a shoulder there for a moment. Let's move on, sister, he whispered, and made the first real smile in a long time. Jack left the Santa Cruz campground early in the morning, while the coffee was still burning his throat and his hands were shaking from a short nap. The weather stayed dry until Salinas, but beyond the city the sky began to close in with a thick gray front coming in from the ocean. Truckers on the air were recommending slowing down. A heavy rainstorm was approaching on the pass. Jack eased off the gas, checked the tire pressure on the dashboard, and continued toward I-5, intending to head northeast. The first sharp gust of wind hit the side of the van as the road made a gentle curve over a bridge. Within minutes, the rain had covered the highway, the windshield wipers were struggling to clear the water, and the oncoming headlights were turning into blurry spots. Jack turned on his hazard lights and moved into the right lane, keeping to the 50 mph limiter. Ahead of him was a silver minivan with a "Baby on Board" sticker on the rear window. The car was getting closer and then falling behind, clearly feeling unsure of itself. On a gentle slope, the minivan suddenly hydroplaned, the rear end sliding to the left and the car spinning across the lane. Jack let go of the gas pedal, held the wheel, and watched as the minivan slid across 2 lanes, hit the guardrail, and came to rest at an angle, blocking part of the roadway. He put the car in park, put on his hooded jacket, grabbed the hazard warning triangle and first aid kit. There were other cars around, but the traffic was too thick for anyone to stop quickly. Jack set up a sign 50 meters away, plugged the flashlight into the cigarette lighter, then walked up to the minivan. The front end was dented, the airbags deployed, the windshield was intact, the side windows were covered in a web of cracks. Through the fogged-up side window, he saw a woman in the driver's seat struggling to free herself from her seatbelt, a small boy in a car seat behind her. Jack knocked, and the woman turned her head, her face smeared with pillow powder, her eyes wide with shock. He gestured to open the door. The back door was stuck, but after 2 tugs it swung open. Jack reached inside, found the release button. The seatbelt was too crooked to release the driver's shoulder, and he took a cable cutter from his pocket and carefully cut the strap at the lock. The woman exhaled, but remained where she was, her movements suggesting she was checking her arms and neck. "Do you have pain in your back or neck?" he asked, trying to speak clearly without unnecessary words. "It seems to be intact. Everything is spinning," she said. Jack turned his attention to the child. The boy was crying, but his hands were on the seat belts. The buckle gave way immediately, and he lifted the seat and the child out the open door, covering him with a blanket that was lying on the floor of the minivan. Then he returned to the woman, helping her out, holding her under the elbow. The wet asphalt was slippery, the wheels of passing cars were knocking down the watery mist. Jack led them both to his van and opened the side door. It was relatively dry inside, with rubber mats on the floor. He put the woman in the passenger seat, put the boy in a sleeping bag, and turned on the interior lights and heater. The connection in this area worked intermittently, but after the third call to 911, the operator answered. Jack explained the coordinates and the nature of the accident and specified that the victims were conscious. While he was talking, the woman took off her wet jacket and checked the boy. "He's okay," she said as Jack put the phone away. "My name is Lauren. His name is Sam. I'm Jack. The rescuers will be here soon. It's better to move a little off the side of the road. There's less splash from the stream. I can hold on. Thanks for stopping." Jack closed the doors, got behind the wheel, and drove slowly forward about 300 yards, finding a wide turnoff to an old logging trail. There he could wait for help without risking a second strike. The windshield wipers swatted away the rain, which was getting heavier. He turned off the engine, turned to Lauren. There was a small bleeding scratch on her upper lip. Her left forearm was blue from the pillow hit. Jack got some napkins and treated the wound with hydrogen peroxide from the first aid kit. The child calmed down and snuggled up to his mother. "We were driving to see my sister in Sacramento," Lauren said. "It's her birthday. I always get nervous driving when it starts raining like this." Jack listened, checking to see if she was going into shock. Sirens started blaring, and a patrol car and ambulance pulled up to the van. The medics checked Lauren and Sam, took their blood pressure, and made sure there were no broken bones. The police filed a report and towed the minivan to the side of the road. The drivers offered to take Lauren to the nearest clinic, but she needed to get her things and figure out how to get there. "There's a gas station with a cafeteria 5 miles away. Let's go there," Jack suggested. "It'll be warmer there than on the side of the road." The cop approved. Lauren and the baby climbed back into the van. They moved at 30 miles an hour without the apocalyptic stream of oncoming headlights. The police cars had closed off a section of the road and rerouted the flow. The gas station was modern. 2 rows of bumps under bright LED panels, a small cafe with plastic tables. Jack parked under the awning and turned off the engine. The cafe smelled of warmed-up pizza and instant coffee. He ordered 3 hot chocolates and simple turkey sandwiches. Sam decided that it was better to drink chocolate through a straw, and his nose was all smeared with foam. Lauren smiled for the first time in an hour. Jack watched her hold the glass for her son so that the drink wouldn't spill. There was no ceremony in the scene, only everyday concern, and it made him feel warmer. 15 minutes later, Lauren called her sister from Jack's phone. Cell service was available thanks to the tower near the interchange. "We'll need to spend the night somewhere in Redding," she told her sister. "The car is being taken to a service center tomorrow. I'll find a rental and come back in the morning." After hanging up, she turned to Jack. "I thought the trip would be easy. In the end, I was almost scared to the point of fainting. Your intervention, I don't know how to thank you." Jack shook his head. "I ended up there by accident, just like any other car on that lane." The boy fell asleep, lying across 2 chairs, his mother's sweatshirt under his head. Lauren carefully covered his legs with her jacket. She looked tired but calm. "My husband died in Iraq 6 years ago," she said in a level voice. "He was a mechanic in an engineering unit. A mine hit the truck. His friend called me 2 days later and explained that it had happened in an instant. We had a 2-month-old Sam at the time. For a long time, I was afraid of highways and explosions of any kind. A tire pop, fireworks, the sharp hum of a transformer. Over time, fear turned into a habit. I always calculate escape routes, prepare for trouble. Today, I calculated many options, but I couldn't keep the car afloat." She looked at her hands as if checking for trembling. "The psychologist said that any accident on the road will bring back the trauma. Today, you and this old van helped me," she added, looking at the Econo parked behind the glass. "It seems like your sister is still protecting you." Jack looked down. He explained that he had lost his sister 2 weeks ago and was driving without a set route to stay on the move. Lauren listened attentively without interrupting. Jack described finding the keys, removing the seats, putting the mattresses and the road slab in the trunk. Then it turns out that today 2 sisters did their job, Lauren said. They didn't need many words. Outside the rain had stopped, leaving smooth, shiny puddles on the asphalt. Lauren looked at her watch. It was almost 8 o'clock. I'll call a cab to the motel, she decided. I'll sort out the car in the morning and get to Sacramento. I can give you a ride, Jack offered. I'm staying there anyway. It's dangerous to drive any further along this highway at night. She nodded. Jack carried the sleeping Sam into the van, laid him down on the mattresses, and placed a pillow next to him. Lauren took 2 suitcases from the minivan, and a service technician sent by the insurance company helped load them. The 10-minute drive to the motel passed in silence. The colorful neon sign, Redbud Lodge, blinked at the entrance. Jack stopped under the reception canopy, helped Lauren with her luggage. The receptionist quickly checked the room. Sam was still asleep. Jack moved him to a chair at the counter while they processed the paperwork. We'll manage here, Lauren said, taking the key card. Do you have a plan for tomorrow? None. I'll wake up, check the weather, and probably go further north, maybe towards the mountains. She extended her hand. Jack shook it. The handshake was firm, without unnecessary symbolism. I'm not a great talker, Lauren said, but you saved both of us today, and not just physically. Please be careful on the road. You too. Good luck with the renovation, Jack replied. He walked back to the van, started the engine, and pulled to the far side of the parking lot. The rain had finally stopped. The moisture evaporated from the hood in light clouds. Jack turned off the engine, folded the seat back, and sat in silence for a long time, listening to the raindrops fall silently from the awning. 2 scenes from today floated before his closed eyes, the minivan spinning and the cafe table with a small hand reaching out with a straw for a chocolate bar. In both images, there was a sense of the road that was hard to articulate but easy to feel. He didn't bother trying to explain it. He slid the key between the pages of his sister's notebook, turned off the lights, and let the darkness fill the space, knowing that the next day would already hold its share of unknowns. The van had been heading north along Highway 97 for 3 days when the temperature dropped and the sky filled with brown dust raised by the wind from the barren lands. Jack pulled onto a side road to check the oil and let the engine cool. An old sign stood on the side of the road, Sand Trail Motel 2 miles ahead, vacancies. The rest of the highway was 10 miles long, and Jack decided that it would be more convenient to spend the night under a roof than to fight the night wind. The driveway to the motel was covered in fine sand, and the wheels skidded, scattering dry waves under the bottom. The complex consisted of a long, squat building with 20 rooms and a small office with a sign where only half the neon lights were on. In the parking lot were 2 pickups and a motorcycle with touring panniers. Jack turned off the engine, stretched, checked his eyes in the mirror. They were red from dust. The office smelled of instant coffee and floor cleaner. A stocky, gray-haired man with a short beard and hearing aids in both ears sat behind the counter. He noticed the visitor, stood up, and smiled. "Good evening," the man said clearly, looking straight at Jack's lips. "Do you need a number?" Jack nodded. "One night, maybe 2, he answered, louder than usual, so that the other could hear the words. "Jenkins, the owner," the man said, handing over a wax registration card. On the wall behind him was a rack of vinyl records, Steely Dan, The Doors, Miles Davis. Next to it was an old bass guitar without strings. Jack filled in the details and handed over the card. "I've seen your records," he said. "Do you like to play?" Jenkins patted his hearing aids. "I did. I used to be a bass player in a club band. Then I lost my hearing after an amplifier exploded. There was a short circuit. Hearing aids help, but I don't hear music the same way anymore. I left the stage, bought this place 12 years ago. It's quieter here." He handed over a plastic key with the number 15. "The water is hot. The internet sometimes goes out. The bar behind the reception wall is open until midnight. If you need anything else, knock louder. I usually read in the utility room." Jack thanked him and left. The room was at the end of the hallway. The paint on the door was peeling, but the handle closed tightly. Inside was a single bed, a table with a lamp, a refrigerator the size of a toolbox, a shower with tiles that showed traces of old grout. The air conditioner was on, blowing warm, dry air. Jack dropped his backpack and opened the window. Sand rustled outside. The noise resembled a light scraping. He washed himself, changed into a clean t-shirt, and went out to the small bar the owner had mentioned. The room was simply decorated. 5 tables, a counter of old varnished wood, photos of various bands on the walls, worn drumsticks in a frame, a poster of the 1988 ZZ Top Tour. Jenkins himself stood behind the counter, pouring himself a soda from a siphon. "Beer or something stronger?" he asked, noticing the guest. "Surprise me," Jack replied. The owner took out a bottle of bourbon, poured 2 even shots, and placed them in front of his guest and himself. "I drink without making a sound," he said, "but I remember the taste." They drank. Their throats burned, but the feeling was calm, without the usual sharpness. Jack ordered another and sat down on a stool. There was no music on. Jenkins, having lost his hearing, preferred silence, and the bar maintained an atmosphere in which one could talk without raising one's voice. After the second serving, Jenkins asked, "Where are you heading?" "I haven't decided yet. I'm moving until it gets easier." Jack realized he'd said it out loud for the first time. The owner nodded and wiped down the counter. "I've played hundreds of concerts. I always thought that the stage was the point. When I lost my hearing, it was like it was cut off. I sat at home, counting the silence. Then I realized that you can hold space for others, even if you yourself can't hear the music. I bought a motel. People here also seek respite. I get their stories through dialogues, not through notes." Jack took the glass with both hands. Sometimes loss comes on 2 fronts at once. First, the marriage fell apart, and then my sister died. The van I drove was her project. Now I drive without a map. Jenkins poured the soda and placed it in front of Jack. "Drink the water. It's from our well, soft. Tell me about your sister, if you want." Jack took a sip and put the glass down. Amy was 6 years younger. An enthusiast, she dreamed of rebuilding a van and driving around the coast. We postponed the trip. In the end, we buried her because of an accident. The key was left, and there were sketches in her notebook. I took the car and went alone. The owner listened attentively, bending his head closer to catch every word. "You don't know what you'll find, only what you're leaving behind," he said. "Bikers and truckers often stop here. Everyone says the same thing. The emptiness in the rearview mirror seems smaller than the emptiness in front. But if you keep driving, the horizons start working like gears. They grind time." "Does it help?" Jack asked. "It helped me. I found this motel. I was tired, but I started sleeping. The silence stopped scaring me. Sometimes old friends come over and bring records. I don't hear the heights, but I feel the vibration of the speakers. It reminds me of the past, but it doesn't thunder in their faces." Jack grinned and turned his attention to the guitar. "Do you keep the instrument for the sake of memory? For the sake of form?" Jenkins picked up the guitar, ran his fingers along the fretboard. The wood gives a faint response to the fingers even without strings. It reminds you that things can sound without sound. He put the guitar back and pulled a stack of cards from under the counter. Each one had initials and a short note: date, guest's name, city. 3 years ago, I decided to record who shared what. No details, just the thesis. Maybe one day I'll figure out how to put them into a book. He handed over a blank card. "Write down something of your own." Jack picked up a pen and thought. He wrote, J. Walker, 34, on the road to find weight after loss. He put the date. He handed the card back. Jenkins inserted it into the empty slot. Motel rule. Anyone who left a card can take any old one. You can pick someone's entry. Someone needs their thoughts to continue on their journey. Jack flipped through a few. C. Lopez quits bank job, heads to ocean with no plan. R. Patel looking for brother he lost touch with 10 years ago. He picked out a card that said, M. Kelly, medic, can't forget patients who died on his shift. He put it in his pocket. Thank you, said Jack. I might find this useful. The bar was empty. The clock on the wall showed 11:30. Jack paid for his drinks and finished his water. Standing up, he felt a slight heaviness in his head, but not fog. He realized that the alcohol this time did not hide the pain, but only gave him the opportunity to voice it. Jenkins turned off the overhead light and turned on the wall lamp by the door. If you need more water, there's a cooler in the hallway. Coffee and simple buns from 6 in the morning tomorrow. Jack thanked her and went out into the hallway. The air smelled of dust and wood preservatives. In the room, he washed up and lay down on the bed. No outside noise, just the faint hum of the air conditioner. He took out the nurse's card and placed it next to Amy's notebook. He thought that someone else's short confession was next to her sketches, and that made the connection seem logical. Different people had left marks in the same place. He turned off the light. In the darkness, the branches of the bushes under the window snapped, sand rubbed against the concrete steps. The sounds were even, without surprises. Jack lay listening to his heart. It was beating evenly. He said it out loud, quietly, but enough for him to hear. I'm moving. It wasn't a mantra, not an attempt at persuasion, just a fact. He rolled over and let sleep come without pills or an alarm clock in the morning. Jack left the Sand Motel after an early coffee and a quick exchange with Jenkins. As they pulled out, the owner raised his hand in farewell, and Jack returned the gesture without turning up the music. The engine provided a reliable background noise. The road was straight, but the traffic required attention. Sections of the asphalt were covered in dry sand in places. By midday, the dust had cleared. The open landscape was now dotted with sparse bushes, then low trees. The road sign promised a national park in 40 miles, but Jack had turned off early. A narrow dirt road led off to the right towards the steppe, with a sign nearby. Field of Memory Public Access. It wasn't the inscription that interested me so much as the smooth track that went behind the hill. Jack slowed down, checked his fuel level. 2/3 of the tank, ready to explore. The van slowly climbed a low ridge. On the other side was a roped-off field about the size of a couple of football fields. Along 3 sides were wooden posts with hooks. On the hooks hung jackets, hats, children's boots, army dog tags, kites, and photographic prints in transparent bags. The ground beneath the posts was leveled and compacted. In the center of the shallow area were several long benches and a steel box with a lid. Nearby was a Ranger Park service vehicle, the cabin empty, the doors closed. Jack parked the van at the edge of the lot and turned off the engine. He stepped out and immediately smelled the faint smell of dry herbs. The wind was blowing low, catching the hanging objects. The plastic was knocking. The thin chains were making a light metallic sound. There were no clear paths inside the fence. People were walking freely. Jack walked along the edge of the first line of objects. A denim jacket was hanging at eye level. A note was attached to the belt. Tyler, 1995-2018, right on. A little further on is a neatly folded scarf with a volunteer badge tied to it. Under each item is a small wooden peg with a number, apparently a record for the caretaker. Closer to the center stood a woman of about 50 in hiking boots. In front of her on the bench lay a sports medal. The woman stretched out her arms, as if trying to imagine where the object would fit on the rack. Jack did not want to interfere, so he moved on. He saw a football with autographs, a file of old magazines in transparent film, tiny ballet flats. Each item hung separately, leaving enough space between the things so that the gaze did not slide in one stream. In the opposite corner, men in parka uniforms were attaching a fresh board to a stand. Jack walked up to a comfortable conversational distance. "Excuse me," he said, "is this an organized place, or did people just start living things and you maintained order?" The man with the Ranger logo on his jacket wiped his hands on a rag and answered without pathos in a normal working tone. The field was created after a fire 9 years ago. Many locals died then. Relatives installed the first poles, but the authorities did not object because the area was outside the new construction plans. We make sure that nothing is blown away by the wind and that the objects do not rot. There is a rule. You cannot leave food and sealed liquids. The rest is at the discretion of the families. Do you need to register? Yes. The ranger pointed to a steel box. There are forms in there. The person fills out a name, life dates, and contact information so we can notify them if we start reconstructing the fence. Do people spend the night here? Parking is allowed for up to 2 days. The main thing is not to make a fire. The wind brings dry grass to the site. The risk of fire is high. Jack nodded, thanked him, and walked away. He walked around the perimeter of the field, going back to things he had already seen to check for any details he had missed. Sometimes an item would look random like a cracked Chinese teacup held in place with wire, but underneath it would be a marker stone with the same number as the one on the stand, so someone had chosen it deliberately. The woman with the medal had decided the matter. Now the award was hanging under number 412. The peg was driven in. The paper with the questionnaire was in the ranger's hands. The woman went to the car, got behind the wheel, but did not leave right away. It seemed she needed time to calm down. Jack walked back to the van. He pulled out the box with Amy's things from inside and opened the lid. Inside were a best bro ever mug, a notebook with plans for how to remodel the van, and sunglasses. He sorted through the things in his hands, trying to imagine any of them on the counter. His hand stopped, but then an inner voice said it was too early. Not ready. The box went back into place. Jack locked the door, stepped back, and looked out at the field. The sky was getting lighter toward evening. The shadows were lengthening, objects were losing color, but still recognizable by their shape. He decided to stay the night. He returned to the lidded box and read the instructions. Overnight stays permitted. Take household waste with you. Toilet 100 meters past the east entrance. There was no need to sign in the camp log. Jack checked his water supply, set up the gas stove inside the van by the open side door, and cooked instant noodles. He ate slowly. On the horizon, the sun sank behind the ridge, and the air grew cool. An elderly man in a camouflage baseball cap approached the fence. He held a child's baseball glove in his hands. Jack watched but did not approach. The man unfolded the form on his knee, filled in the fields, then carefully hung the glove on a free hook. The wind did not shake it. The material was thick. The fingers held their shape. The man paused, placed his palm on the top of the post, as if he wanted to feel the weight of the object through the wood, then took off his hat, stood silently for a moment, and walked toward the truck. The car drove away, raising a small cloud of dust. It was dusk. The Rangers turned off the office light in their vehicle and drove off toward the highway. There were 3 cars left in the parking lot, including Jack's van. He turned off the main light in the cabin, leaving only a small flashlight. It was warm enough inside thanks to the multi-layer insulation, but he laid out a sleeping bag in case of wind. Before going to bed, Jack went outside and walked around the field again. He didn't go far, he just checked how the place looked at night. There was enough moonlight to see the silhouettes of objects. They seemed more static than during the day. The pegs were bleached by the light, the pendants cast clear shadows. There was no artificial light. The field accepted the darkness completely. The air was dry, smelling of salty soil warmed by the day. Jack paused by Tyler's jacket, the one with the inscription "Ride On." He reached out with his hand, without touching the fabric. He stepped back. He had to leave before he felt the urge to impulsively leave something of his own and regret it in the morning. Returning to the van, he sat down on the threshold, not closing the door all the way. He took out the nurse's card that Jenkins had given him, unfolded it, and read it again. "I can't forget 10 names, they go with me." Jack put the card in his breast pocket. He took out Amy's notebook and opened the first page. There, in pencil, were the measurements of the closet, a list of the necessary materials, and nothing personal. He took a pen and wrote on the back of the sheet, "Memory field. I left no things. Amy, for now they are an anchor for me, not a landmark. I will return when I can change the purpose." He closed the notebook. I spent the night restlessly. I woke up a couple of times because of the rustling of grass. The wind set the suspended chains in motion. The sound passed through the door latch. At 3:40, I checked my phone. There was no connection, but the time worked according to the internal clock of the device. I fell asleep again. At dawn, a light haze rose from the ground. Jack stepped out into the cold air, hunched over to push the weariness out of his shoulders. The woman who had been attaching the metal emerged from the camper next door. She nodded at Jack. "I couldn't leave," she said. "I wanted to make sure the metal wouldn't fall." "It's holding on tight," he replied. The woman smiled reservedly, said goodbye, and went to the car. The diesel engine started, the camper moved, and soon disappeared over the hill. Jack made coffee and drank it standing up. After that, he decided that was enough. He had to go while his head was clear. He collected the trash, put away the stove, and locked the doors. Before turning on the ignition, he looked at the field again. In the morning light, the objects were clear, as if everyone was waiting for the next visitor. Jack put the van in neutral, rolled it down the slope to start the engine outside the parking lot, and only then turned on the engine. Dust rose, but did not fly into the fence. The wind was blowing in the opposite direction. Back on the highway, the speed is stable. In the rearview mirror, the field was getting smaller. Jack gripped the steering wheel with both hands. He hadn't left anything there. Some internal conditions had not yet been met. But the idea of returning seemed likely. This was surprising. Before, the idea of returning to one point was frightening. Today, it is not. Jack left Umatilla County at dawn. A 20-something girl in jean shorts, a gray hoodie, and a yellow backpack stood on the shoulder of the road at the junction of 395. A large cardboard sign read North Anywhere. It wasn't raining, but the air was still cold. She tapped her feet to stay warm. Jack slowed down. The memory field was still visible in the rearview mirror, even though it was technically in another state. He turned on his turn signal and stopped. "Where are you going?" he asked, rolling down the window. "I said anywhere," she replied. "If you have fuel and the mood, you can go to Canada, you can go to the ocean. The main thing is not to go back." "There's plenty of room," Jack said, and folded the right seat back. "Don't chew on the steering wheel or mess with the brakes." She grinned, threw her backpack into the van, and took a seat. "I'm Maggie, but don't get me started. I change my name once a month," she said. "My wife is Maggie," Jack responded. "Is your name different?" "Okay, I'll be Lori. What's your name?" "Jack." The van started moving. The girl took off her jacket and folded it on her lap. On her left arm was a tattoo of a small black bird. She carefully examined the panel and the ceiling trim as if in a museum. "Is the van yours?" "My sister's, to be more precise. I'm remodeling it into a house." "Beautiful. I had my father's minibus, but it was burned at the dump." 20 miles later, they pulled into a gas station. Jack filled up the tank, and the girl bought 2 coffees and a pack of crackers. She sat down with her feet on the glove compartment. Jack silently put her shoes back on the mat. "Whoever taught etiquette didn't hitchhike," she commented. "Whoever damages the interior goes on foot," he replied. They pulled onto I-82. The day was empty. The radio was staticky with country music. Lori switched to talk radio. The news was about weather fronts and the decline of the wheat crop. "Dry numbers," she said. "When you read them without a face, they seem alien, like when they wrote about my father's death. Another case of opioid overdose, and I saw him fall asleep on the couch." Then the coroner came, wrapped the ice cream label in the report. Jack nodded, keeping his hand on the wheel. "How old were you?" 16. "I thought illegal substances made you a rock and roll star." "No, they make you a record in the city report. My mother wasn't home at the time. She'd gone to work the second shift." "You say this easily." "I have to talk about this somehow. If I cry, there won't be enough money for therapy." They turned into a small area overlooking the Columbia River. Jack got out some sandwiches, and Lori got a metal flask from her backpack. "My great-uncle's moonshine," she explained, "with insulation." He took a sip, strong and rough. It looks like kerosene. Kerosene is not suitable for food, but this will at least warm you up. After the meal, they were silent, looking at the water. Jack felt that he did not want to talk about his sister, but Lori was already looking at him. What is this project with the mobile home? My sister planned for a year. She didn't have time. I'm going so as not to stand still. Sounds like me, only I don't have a car. This story is the fruit of creativity of a novice author. If you are close to the topic, support it with a like and a subscription. We are open to good advice, but we ask for no negativity. It is important for everyone to go their own way at their own pace. It started raining that evening. Jack suggested a motel. Lori insisted on a sandy lot near an abandoned sawmill. The van was parked between rusty cisterns. They laid out mattresses, Jack inside, Lori by the open door to smoke. The rain was getting heavier, pounding the roof. Lori pressed a loud pop-punk tune on her phone. "That's a nasty signal," Jack remarked. "It matches our campsite," she replied. "Want to play truth or dare? You ask a question, and if I lie, you take a sip." Jack shrugged. "First, have you ever truly loved?" "Yes." Lori nodded. "Second, have you ever beaten someone so badly that they ended up in the hospital?" "No." "Boring," she said, taking a sip herself. They argued about Nirvana's acoustics and why people buy disposable tableware. Lori argued that whoever reduces the amount of trash on the planet should get a Nobel Prize. Jack responded that trash is a product of people, and people don't throw away their own. By midnight, the flask was empty. Lori laughed as she told the story of the school musical, where she was cast as a tree because she had stage fright. "I stood with cardboard leaves and thought, if I fall, no one will pick me up. Since then, I have been falling on purpose so that I can get up myself," she explained. Jack smiled. He laughed not so much at the story as at the intonation, which was not bitter. He felt light, even allowed himself to talk about the first week after his sister's death. He did not recall the adjacent details out loud, the date, the morning, but he said, "There was a feeling that the house was crushed from within by itself." Lori listened attentively, interrupting only twice, first to clarify how old his sister was, then to ask where she was buried. "Have you seen the memory field?" she asked. "Yes. I would have left my mother's crystal dog there, but I think my mother wouldn't have let me go." The weather improved. Lori officially took over the right half of the mattress, warning that if Jack tried to play Big Brother, she would leave on the first truck. Jack wrapped himself in a blanket and fell asleep when the clock on his phone read 2:10. He woke up around 7. The van door was closed. It was cold inside. Someone had turned off the heater to save battery power. Lori was gone. Jack went outside. The parking lot was empty, his backpack gone. On the hood, pinned under a rock, was a folded note, torn from Amy's notebook. It contained one line, "You're alive. That's already a lot." Under the signature, a small sketch of a bird, like the tattoo on her arm. Jack turned the paper over, checked the back. Nothing. He looked at the road marks. Skinny tires, someone had probably picked her up before dawn. He didn't remember Lori's number, and she hadn't offered to. Jack put the note in his notebook with the previous one, where he wrote about the field of memory. He thought that his sister's box of things was still incomplete. Symbolic gifts from people he met were added to it. A nurse's card, a bird on a leaf. These objects did not qualify as a memorial. On the contrary, they widened the road. He ate crackers for breakfast, poured himself the rest of the water, and started the engine. The fuel gauge showed half a tank, enough to make it to the next city. The sun was rising over the line of pines. Jack turned on the trucker's radio. Marlon's familiar voice was talking about a traffic accident on I-90. Jack said he would take 97 and wished him luck. The engine ran smoothly. He put Lori's note in a clear pocket on the dashboard, next to a photo of Amy in a baseball cap. 2 stories, inches apart, connected by a single road. He pulled the van onto the highway. The rusty tanks quickly disappeared in the rearview mirror. Jack couldn't even imagine where Lori was. The girl who changed her name. She left the sentence without periods, like a road with no end. It was enough to not feel the silence as emptiness. Jack pulled off Highway 97 onto a narrow road past a sign that read, Red Willow 2.5 miles. His gas tank was at the quarter mark, and the map showed the next settlement was almost 50 miles away. The entrance to the town was modest. A row of trees, a greenish sign with a faded cow emblem, and the words, Population 1,374. The main street spanned 2 block lines. Near the intersection stood a grocery store, a post office, a barber shop, and a low tin building with a sign Cal's Auto and Tire. There was an old tire lying under the awning. Next to it, a stool with a steaming coffee mug. Jack braked, opened the window. The air smelled of rubber and fresh shavings. The van's side fender was rattling, the threads stripped from the last gravel road. He parked outside the body shop. The door opened. A short, gray-haired man in his 70s stepped out, wearing oily overalls and a awesome patch. He wiped his hands on a rag and squinted. The silencer isn't loud, but something is rattling, the veteran said, more as a fact than a question. The mudguard, Jack confirmed. Got some rivets and a drill. I have everything except my hands, which refuse to lift tools today. I'm Calvin, call me Cal. The workshop is mine, but my joints are acting up these days. Jack introduced himself, lifted the back door, and pulled out a couple of his sockets and a ratchet from a drawer. Cal nodded approvingly. The one who arrived works, he said without mockery. I'll get coffee, and you put the car in the pit. The repair took half an hour. Jack removed the remaining clips, drilled new points, and fixed the plastic shield with metal rivets given to him by Calvin. The old man returned with 2 mugs. He handed one to his guest. Pure black, he warned. They're saving sugar as if the war were still going on. The coffee was bitter but warm. Jack rose from the inspection pit, wiped his hands. Cal patted him on the shoulder. I'll take $2 for the work because you got away with my rivets, and another $1 for the mug if you don't return it. I'll pay $5 and keep the mug as a souvenir, Jack replied. Cal laughed with a dry cough. Memory is a bit of a problem here. People are leaving. Empty houses are being sold for next to nothing. But the mug, well, it will be a reason to sign it with paint. Jack was here. The town lived at a measured pace. Jack walked down the main street, stopped at the grocery store, bought some apples and a can of coolant. When he returned, he noticed that Cal was leaning against the workshop door, sipping another cup of coffee. Listen, said the old man, you've been driving for a while, you can tell by your back. If you want to stay, I can offer you parking at my barn. There's water and an outlet. Why are you suggesting it? Jack asked. This evening, Cal fell silent, rubbing his neck. I'm burying a dog today. Other people are busy, and I need someone to help dig a hole and just be present. If you don't mind, stay until tomorrow. Jack remembered carrying his sister's ashes to the pier and realized that the request was simple and honest. I'll stay, he said. Can we find some shovels? We'll find shovels, Cal answered and breathed a sigh of relief. In the yard behind the workshop stood a slanted wooden shed. Nearby, under a canopy, stood a large Labrador retriever with a gray muzzle. The body was laid out on an old army blanket. The head rested on a checkered shirt. Cal sat down next to it and stroked its fur. His name was Rex. 12 years. He served as a search dog, traveled with me half the country while I trained contractors. Last night he fell asleep and never woke up. Heart. The old man did not raise his eyes. There are no relatives left, just me and him. And I am, you could say, half iron. Where would you like to be buried? Outside the city, by the river. There's a maple tree growing there. We usually had a picnic there. Jack agreed. They loaded the body into a wooden box, something Cal had knocked together out of planks when he realized he had nothing to pay the vet for. He found the shovels right there, old but sturdy. The maple was about a mile away. Cal's truck was moving slowly. Jack was driving the van behind the column. A field of late corn lay to the left, and a canal ran to the right. The maple stood alone by the water. The green had not yet changed to autumn, but the leaves were beginning to turn yellow at the edges. The hole was dug by two men. The earth was soft from recent rains. Jack worked silently. The old man scooped more slowly, pausing, but not giving up. By sunset, the hole had reached the desired depth. They lowered the box, tightened the ropes, and filled it with soil. Cal set up a wooden cross, a straight plank from the workshop, Rex's name burned in with a soldering iron. The old man sat down on a log and put his hand on the fresh hill. When I returned from the Corps, I thought that there was nothing worse than loneliness. Then I took a puppy to training. It turned out that loneliness comes in different forms. With a dog it is bearable, he said calmly. The sun went down. Jack stretched out his legs, leaned against the wheel of the truck. The silence was clear, without alarm. After a few minutes, Cal stood up, brushed off his knees. Let's go to the city. We'll eat stew in the evening. The old Kala house was behind the workshop, across a narrow alley. The smell of stewed meat and vegetables wafted out onto the porch. The old man turned on the lamp above the table. Wooden furniture, a frame with medals, a portrait of the platoon on the wall. In the corner, an old record player, but no records. I donated the records to the Veterans Museum, the owner explained. I can't listen to them anymore anyway. They ate in silence until their plates were empty. Cal wiped his lips with a napkin. I don't know how to say thank you. Should I repay you for your work with more? You've already paid, Jack replied. I needed a place where I wasn't rushed. The old man smiled. Then I'll pour you a sip. He took a bottle of bourbon from the cabinet and poured 2 centimeters into glasses. For those who walk alongside us while we walk, he said. They drank. Their throats warmed. Jack felt the vague weight lift. Instead of heaviness, there was a smooth weariness. Cal laughed unexpectedly. You know, Rex loved to spoil your neatness. Every time I cleaned the back of the truck, he dragged the cans under the bush. Today, while we were digging, I caught myself thinking, I'm waiting for him to pull out another useless rag from under the car. The old man shook his head and laughed again, but there was no sadness in the laughter. Jack laughed too, the sound unintentionally loud, as if he'd forgotten what his own laugh sounded like. Cal winked. See, it works. Jack spent the night in the wagon by the barn. Sleep came quickly. The coolness did not disturb him. He wrapped himself in a sleeping bag and heard the distant creak of the weather vane on the roof of the workshop. Before going to sleep, he thought that the day had been simple. Manual work, a hole in the ground, a dog cross. Simple, but it felt right. In the morning, Cal met the guest in the workshop. He laid out breakfast coffee, eggs, a piece of ham. The old man looked more cheerful. Rex would have found food before you, he joked, but you're second fastest. Jack smiled. Today we'll do a thorough repair on your mobile home, since it's been delayed. They began inspecting the undercarriage. Cal gave advice, Jack tightened the nuts. 3 hours passed quickly. When the job was done, Cal moved the tin sign on the wall and screwed in a new rivet. Consider it a certificate from my workshop. You would have stayed longer, but the road calls, right? That's right, Jack confirmed. Thanks for everything. The old man held out a small copper token with a picture of a dog and the unit's call sign. Here you go. This is Rex's token from when he passed the standards. Let him remind you that help comes suddenly, but accurately. Jack twirled the token for a long time, then carefully hung it on the bunch of keys to the van. I promise not to lose. Cal clapped him on the shoulder. If you happen to be passing through in the fall, drop in. They make pumpkin pies here that would knock off any chef's crown. They shook hands. Jack got behind the wheel and started the engine. The old man stood by the gate until the van turned the corner. Before the turn, Jack saw in the mirror. Cal raised his hand and silently moved his fingers as if repeating the command, forward. Jack responded with the horn. On the way out of town, he laughed loudly once more alone this time, without witnesses. The laughter came out freely, without tension. A minute later, it quieted down, but the smile remained. In the glove compartment lay a cup from the workshop. A copper token jingled on the keys. It was a memory that did not drag him down, but added a reason to keep turning the wheels. The van wound its way along the narrow serpentine road along the Oregon coast. The low sky pressed down with a steady light, without glare. Ahead of them was an impromptu viewing platform, a section of an abandoned construction site. Fence posts stretched along the cliff, the asphalt ended in a steep edge. Jack wanted to look at the sea and stopped the car. The engine went into idle, and after turning off, the exhaust rang metallically. He went out and noticed a woman in a gray cloak. She was standing at the very edge of the cliff, her heels almost hanging over the void. Her hands were not holding the railing, her gaze was not visible, her face was covered by damp strands of hair. The wind was blowing towards the sea, not in gusts, but in one directed stream. The cloak flapped against the woman's knees, but she did not move. Jack estimated the distance to her about 7 meters. He took a step, then another. The stones crunched under his soles. The woman shuddered, but did not turn around. Jack stopped, deciding not to come closer without warning. "The cliff here is unstable," he said in a loud but even voice. "A section of the ledge came off after a rain 2 years ago." The woman turned her head slowly. Her eyes were red, and there was a dried track of tears on her cheeks. She nodded as if she had heard the information, but did not move. "I'm not going to jump," she said calmly. "I'm just standing there." Jack didn't argue. He stood a little to the side, closer to the van, so as not to loom over her. The silence stretched on for about 20 seconds. The sound of the surf under the rock was steady, like a big engine under the deck. "Do you often have to explain to strangers that you don't want to die?" the woman asked without turning her head. "This is the first time," Jack replied. "But I know what a man who thinks about the edge looks like." She nodded again and took a step back. Her heels were now on solid ground. The woman turned to face him. She looked to be about 40. The coat looked expensive, but shabby, snags on the sleeves, different buttons. "I had a son," she said, 13 years old. "He died a week ago of bacterial meningitis. It all happened in 36 hours, from the first symptom to resuscitation. We didn't have time to understand. All I hear now is the doctors whispering in the hallway." Jack put his hands in his pockets to keep them from automatically jerking forward. "My name is Jack," he said. "I recently buried my sister. She was killed in an accident. I don't want to compare the losses, they are different. But I know that the sound of the hallway lingers longer than any words." The woman stood silently for a moment, then stepped toward the low concrete block that had once marked the parking lot. She sat down and stuck her fingers under the collar of her coat, as if checking to see if the buttons were intact. "My name is Carol," she said. "I moved here from Portland. My son and I used to look for agates here between tides. I couldn't justify sitting around the house with the toys and the empty frames, so I got out of the car and walked to the edge. I wanted to see if I could still be afraid of heights. I was." Jack sat down on the adjacent block, keeping a meter of distance. "Agates are good stones. My sister collected shells. We planned a trip, but postponed it. I took her van and went alone. It's easier to breathe on the road until you need to sleep." "Are you running?" Carol asked. "I was running," Jack admitted, "until I realized that the road ends where the pain ends. Today, I feel less like rushing forward." Carol placed her palm on the concrete nearby, but did not reach out to him. "The first 3 days after the funeral, it seemed to me that the house was screaming. I walked along the corridors, closing every door to reduce the echo. Nothing helped. Here I am, but the screaming is also heard here, just muffled." Jack stretched out his legs, stared at the horizon. He told how he had caught his wife with her lover, how 3 days after the breakup he had received a call from the patrol, how he had driven the van aimlessly. He told about the woman Lori with the bird tattoo, about the funeral of the veteran's dog, about the field of remembrance. He spoke without embellishment, listing the sequence of events. As he spoke, Carol looked at her hands, sometimes exhaling, as if checking whether the sound was alive or not. "We both collect little stops," she said when his voice faded. "You collect people, I collect places where there are no children's voices. Jack's gaze found her eyes. They weren't empty. Rather, they lacked purpose. Did your son laugh here often? He asked. Yes, he caught wet crabs and shouted that each one was the king of the sea. I said that the crabs should be released, and he argued that kings themselves choose where to rule. We released them together. She took a small round stone from her pocket, a striped agate, almost transparent. She turned it over in her fingers. This is the last one he found. I can't leave it, and I can't keep it. Where is the right place to put something that you don't know what to call anymore? Jack took Rex's copper token and the map leaf with the lory bird from his breast pocket and placed them on the concrete nearby. Each item had a purpose. Now it's different. I'm holding on to them until I figure out where their place is. Maybe it will appear later. Carol looked at the token. Is this a dog number? Yes, I helped the owner bury the dog. I received the token not as a reward, but as a reminder that help can be mutual. I don't know where to leave it. I'm holding on to it for now. Agate is waiting too, she said, returning the stone to her pocket. I guess we're both waiting for things to stop cutting into our palms. Jack realized that he didn't feel like leaving. He felt like walking with this woman until she got back to the car. He stood up. Let's walk along the edge. It's safe here if you go 5 meters from the edge. Carol stood up slowly. They walked side by side, not touching. The small pebbles crunched under their feet. Jack told her how his sister had once taken apart his laptop to clean the fan, how angry he had been, and how she had laughed. Carol told her how her son had been afraid of dark water, but had dived in anyway because he wanted to be a biologist. Jack noticed that the air smelled of seaweed and wet sand. Just a fact, no metaphors. He described the smell out loud. Carol nodded. I hear it, she said, and I hear the surf. Our memories are stratified. The sound of the sea is separate. The pain is separate. It doesn't make it easier, but it gives it structure. They reached the old fence and turned back. Carol's steps straightened, her shoulders slumped. When they returned to the point where the van had been parked, she stopped. Will you continue your journey? She asked. Yes, but not for the sake of escape. I have my sister's notebook. I want to finish the plan for remodeling the van, like she dreamed of. Not tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, but I want to. And I'll go back to the house, said Carol. I can't promise to live there forever, but I'll try to survive the walls. Jack held out a piece of paper with a bird drawn on it. They gave it to me when they said, You're alive. That's already a lot. Now this phrase is probably more necessary to you. Carol took the sheet of paper, folded it carefully, and placed it next to the agate. Thank you. I'll leave it on the kitchen shelf. Let it remind me that I can leave the room and go to the window. She took a breath. Jack, you stopped me today before panic could formulate an order. This is a big enough move to be hard for you to bear. Don't make it a chore. I'll try, he replied, but I'm glad I got out of the car when I did. They shook hands briefly. Their palms were cool but not shaking. Carol walked toward her sedan, which was parked at the bottom of the lot. Jack waited for her to get in and start the engine. The car pulled slowly out onto the road, turned on its turn signal, and disappeared around the corner. Jack returned to the cliff. He came closer than before, but not to the edge. He looked down. The waves were beating against the dark walls of the cliffs. He felt no urge to escape the view. Then he opened the van door, took out Amy's notebook, and spread it out on the hood. On a blank page, he wrote, Today I stopped and talked. Felt everything didn't run. He closed the notebook and put it on the dashboard. He got behind the wheel and turned on the ignition. The engine started confidently. In the mirror, the cliff was getting smaller. Jack realized that the road ahead did not look like an obligation. It looked like a choice made without pressure. There was a single token on the seat. His fingers tightened on the metal. He did not yet know where his place was, but now he was sure that he would find it not by running away, but by being there. He turned on his turn signal, merged into the sparse flow of cars, and kept up his speed without rushing. There was no emptiness inside. There was movement inside that no longer needed justification. Jack drove the last 100 miles without stopping. The autumn evening was falling fast, but he wanted to get home before dark, so he could leisurely walk from room to room. He slowed down at the San Jose city limits sign. After weeks of driving, the familiar streets seemed like the other side of the journey. The front yard was overgrown with tall brown weeds. A warm light was burning in the study window. Jack parked the van, turned off the engine, and held the steering wheel for a few seconds, checking for resistance in his chest. His heart was beating steadily. He got out, opened the trunk door, took Rex's brass dog tag off the wall, and carefully placed it in his coat pocket. He picked up Amy's notebook. Before talking to Maggie, he wanted to have something nearby that would remind him why he had come back. There were 4 boxes in the hallway, covered with brightly colored tape that said "Fragile." It smelled of fresh paint. Maggie must have freshened up the hallway while he was gone. There was 1 set of keys on the key holder instead of 2. She had taken hers off. The footsteps upstairs stopped, and Maggie appeared on the stairs. She was wearing jeans and a light gray sweater, her eyes tired, her makeup gone. "You've arrived," she said without surprise, as if she had been waiting for this hour. "I wanted to come back to the light," he replied. "Can we talk?" "Of course." "I made tea." She pointed to the kitchen. Jack followed her. There was a teapot and 2 mugs on the table. He sat down and placed the notebook on the edge, palm down. Maggie filled the cups. Her hands had nowhere to put the extra excitement, and she clasped the mug with both hands, like a support. "I'm listening," she said first. "I drove almost 6,000 miles, Jack began. "I drove because I didn't want to feel or decide. I thought the road would hide everything. It didn't, but it helped me understand a simple thing. Pain doesn't go away until you name it. Today, I can name everything I feel." Maggie nodded without interrupting. "That day when I saw you with another man, I was not only hurt, but also confused," Jack continued. "I thought we were strong, although there were many signs. But we didn't become strong, and it's not only your fault. I saw that you were tired, that you were alone more often, and I justified it with work. It was convenient to think that I was making a career for both of us. In reality, I was just hiding in the office when a lump was already brewing at home." He took a sip, burned his tongue, and waited for the warmth to pass. "Over these weeks, I realized I can forgive you not because I still love you, but because holding on to anger is like trying to hold hot tea with bare fingers every day. I don't need to hold on. I don't want to blame or judge anymore." Maggie took a deep breath and let go of the mug. "I cheated because I was more afraid of your indifference than I was of losing you," she said. "It sounds stupid now, but at the time it seemed like the only way to feel like I was someone else, not an appendage to your schedule. What I did doesn't justify anything. I did something bad. I spent all this time wondering if I could explain it without tears, and I realized that tears aren't needed. Honesty is needed." She looked straight at Jack. "Thank you for coming to talk and not to judge." Jack nodded. "I don't have to stay in a marriage just for the idea," he said quietly. "But I also don't have to remember the scene of the betrayal as the last image of us. We had good moments. San Diego, the old band truck outside, swimming at night in November. Those moments don't have to disappear if we break up right." Maggie looked down, but her face didn't change. "I've already found an apartment near my mother's house," she said. "The contract is signed for 6 months. The furniture is in boxes today. I wanted to wait to ask about the divorce in person." "I'll file the application tomorrow," Jack said. "The papers are ready. The lawyer will just have to set a date with the notary. Financially, half and half, no arguments. I'll keep the house until the sale, then we'll split the proceeds. The car is mine. Your share is anything you think is necessary." Maggie nodded, the words flowing effortlessly, as if they were mundane questions of scheduling. "Do you want to take the van?" she asked. "Yeah, it's in memory of my sister," Jack said. "I'm going to finish her project. Maybe sell the house and live in a van for a while until I figure out where the next house will be. It sounds romantic, but to me it's just a plan, no illusions." They finished their tea. Jack felt that his head was free of heavy thoughts, and his body was free of the usual stiffness. Maggie collected the dishes, put them in the sink, and turned around. "I want to apologize again," she said, "but I understand that you've already made your choice. So I'll just say, thank you for what we had. Thank you for giving me a chance to speak as a human being and not through lawyers." Jack approached, stopped a step so as not to violate the boundary, and bowed his head slightly. "I'm grateful for all the good things we had. Stay safe. If you need help, the bell is open. Not for the sake of returning, but for the sake of respect." After a pause, she extended her hand. Jack took it, squeezed it gently. There was no intention in this gesture to hold on to the past, only respect for what had been lived. In the morning, Jack took the documents to the notary. The lawyer confirmed that the review period would take a month. By then, Maggie had already loaded the boxes into the delivery van and headed out of town. Before she left an envelope on the table. Inside was a photograph taken on their first holiday together. The two of them, wet from the rain, laughing, Jack with a multicolored umbrella over his shoulder. On the back, Maggie had written, "Keep the easy stuff. Let the rest go." Jack placed the framed photograph on the shelf in his office. The pain of the memory did not gnaw. The frame felt like a fact that did not require a solution. He walked through the house, turning off the lights in each room. The silence did not feel empty, did not oppress. It was simply a sound that could be filled when needed. He walked out to the van and opened the door. He placed Amy's notebook on the driver's seat and the brass token next to it. He turned the key. The engine started on the first try. Jack looked in the mirror. The house was intact, the windows straight, the doors closed. This was a stretch of the journey that had ended. He stepped on the gas and pulled out onto the road. There was no grand plan ahead, but there was no escape either. He drove because he felt free again without the weight of duty, a freedom fortified by a forgiveness that left no pain or remorse. Jack left San Jose early the next morning, the fuel gauge on his dashboard showing a full tank, and the only things in the car were a backpack with 2 changes of clothes and his sister's notebook. He headed east through the valley, then up the pass and onto I-5, then turned onto Highway 99 after Sacramento. It was 4.5 hours to Bakersfield, 2 more to Barstow, and 3 more to Flagstaff, where he was born and spent the first 12 years of his life. Distance was no longer a daunting prospect. The road was no longer an escape. It was a route with a purpose. He made it to the Arizona border without stopping overnight, staying alert thanks to a simple schedule. A short warm-up every 100 miles, gas, water. The air became cooler as he approached Flagstaff, and pine trees densely surrounded the highway. Jack slowed down to avoid missing the exit. The city had grown outward over the decades, but the center had hardly changed. The first stop was an old house on Cedar Ridge Drive. It was yellow brick with dark cedar siding. The yard was overgrown, but the fence he and his father had once painted was still there. Jack parked the van across the street and stepped out the creaking side door. His boots sank into the soft earth. The smell of pine and damp earth rose immediately. The windows were shuttered, the lock on the porch was fresh, and the house had obviously been empty for a long time. He walked around to the old mailbox, and the name Walker had faded from the tin sign, the letters barely legible. Jack thought that standing outside his own childhood window 20 years later was not a blow, but a fact. He stood there for a minute until his breathing became even, then walked back to the car. The school was 8 blocks away. The building was now called Middle Science Magnet, though it had once been an elementary school. A new porch had been installed out front, and the soccer goals on the field gleamed with fresh aluminum. Jack walked to the chain-link fence. Classes were still in session, the yard empty. The asphalt still had a pothole near the left basketball stand. He remembered falling there in 4th grade and breaking his wrist. Jack leaned his shoulder against the fence, looking through the glass into the library, where he had once reviewed a constellation map with Amy. No vivid images flashed in his mind, just a simple memory. He had explained to his sister that the light stars represented distant years of light. She had laughed, not understanding how years could fly. Jack let the memory play like a silent movie and walked back, feeling like he had marked a point. He pulled into Forest View Cemetery late in the afternoon. The pine trees cast long shadows, but the sun still lingered over the western edge. The office was closed. The staff worked until 3. Jack remembered the layout of the plot. Section D, fourth row. He picked up a small bouquet of wildflowers from the passenger seat, simple wildflowers he'd bought along the way, and walked between the rows. His father's plaque was granite, with the outline of a pilot's badge. His mother's was bronze, with the words, "Beloved Teacher," in narrow script. Jack squatted, laid the flowers in half on both slabs, and removed a few dry needles. "Hello," he said quietly. "I haven't been here for a while." The words didn't get stuck. He told the story without details, about the marriage, about the betrayal, about Amy's death, about the road. He mentioned the names of the people he had met, said that he felt alive and was not afraid to walk without a schedule. Then he took Rex's copper token from his inside pocket and placed it among the flowers. "It's not a souvenir, but a symbol," he explained to his parents. "It reminds us that loyalty and forgiveness often live in simple actions." He sat like that for about 10 minutes. The wind rustled in the tops of the pines. The smell was sharp and familiar. There was no heavy sadness inside, but rather a feeling of a closed circle. He stood up, brushed off his knees, took a photo of the stove with his phone, not for social networks, but for his personal archive. On his way back to the van, he noticed a man in a work vest in the alley turning off the sprinkler system. Jack asked if he could leave his tag on the stove. The caretaker said metal objects were allowed as long as they were secured or tightly packed. Jack thanked him, made sure the tag wouldn't budge in the wind, and moved the van to the driveway parking lot to spend the night. That evening, he bought dinner at Safeway, teriyaki chicken, rice, and a bottle of mineral water. He ate in the back of the truck, the door open to the cool air. He turned on a small flashlight and placed Amy's notebook on his lap. On a blank page, he wrote, "Today, the house saw me standing in the road, not a boy. The school showed a pothole where a bone once hurt, but no longer hurts. The parents got the news. All these are boundaries that do not press." Then he closed the note. He slept soundly that night, the wind knocking dry branches under the roof of the van. He woke at 5:45 from the noise of an early car, the cemetery's official car pulling into the storage shed. Jack washed his face in a camp sink, made coffee. He sat on the step until the first portion of gas burned out, feeling the clarity of plans. A morning visit to the outskirts of town, where his aunt's former house stood, then back to Route 40, heading east, no hard deadlines. Before leaving, he returned to his parents' plot. The token was still there. There was almost no dew. Jack ran his fingers over the granite. He said, "Until next time." He stood up and took a step back. There was no guilt for the rare visits. There was agreement that people are alive in the actions of those who remember them calmly. He left town around 9 o'clock. Outside the window, the pine trees stretched out, giving way to wide plateaus. Mile after mile, the kilometers passed under the wheels again, but now each figure on the odometer felt not like an escape, but like an expansion of the map, on which both the beginning and the return were marked. Jack stepped on the gas a little. The van's engine ran smoothly, as if it, too, understood that the journey was continuing not out of a need to leave, but out of a desire to move. Whistling an old tune that his father had once played on the guitar, Jack steered the car toward the horizon, where the road merged with the clear, dry sky and required no proof of why he was driving on. Jack parked the wagon on a flat spot in the New Mexico foothills. The day was fading, the sun sinking behind the reddish rocks, but it was still warm enough to sit outside without a jacket. He found some dry branches near a dry creek bed, folded them into a ring, and set up a small metal spark screen. The match worked on the first try, the flame rising in a yellow tongue, the embers quickly burning through the thin bark. Jack sat down on a folding chair, stretching his legs toward the fire. The interior of the van was organized. Along the left side were the shelves he had installed that morning. On the first shelf was Amy's notebook, thicker now. Between the pages were Rex's dog tag, a nurse's card, Lori's bird, a photo of the beach on which Carol had written her phone number. The second compartment held tools, the third pots. The work was slow, but each day brought noticeable progress. Today he had installed the small porthole window he had bought in Las Cruces. The fresh caulk still smelled, so they had set up camp outside. The flames rose higher. Jack threw a thick branch into the middle. The dry wood cracked. There was no one within a radius of 10 miles. The road was left behind the hill. The rare light of the headlights passed in a dark line and disappeared. The silence did not frighten, did not deafen. It accepted sound softly, the rustle of insect wheels on the sand, his own breathing, the rare pop of the roasting air between the logs. He got out a mug and poured half a bourbon, enough to warm his tongue, but not to make his head spin. He held it near the fire, watching the reflection of the flames sway softly. The voices of the people on the road came into his head one by one. First, Cal. The old veteran spoke in a confident bass voice, pointing out, "The rivet holds if the metal is clean. Hands and thoughts are equally important." Jack remembered the dog cemetery, Cal's tenacity, his laugh when Jack laughed for the first time after Amy's funeral. The bark clicked in the fire as if confirming that the connection was alive. Then Lori, her fast talk, her laughter when they argued about trash and rock music. She said, "You're alive. That's a lot." Jack rubbed his finger along the edge of his mug, remembering the picture of the bird. The girl had disappeared at dawn, but her phrase no longer seemed like an alien slogan. He accepted it as an observation, a fact that needed no proof. Carol's measured voice followed, calm but with tension inside. She stood on the cliff, holding the agate, looking for confirmation that she was still afraid of heights. Their conversation about things that had changed their purpose had become one of the turning points for Jack. He remembered her question, "Are you running?" and his confession that he was no longer. Carol had promised to return to the house and listen to the sound of the sea inside herself, not inside the walls. He hoped that she had succeeded. Maggie's figure floated up next to him. The house, the boxes, the tea. There was no shouting, no bitterness, no theater. The conversation went smoothly, like filling out a form. Jack realized that he was no longer looking for explanations of right-wrong, guilty-innocent. Their marriage had ended with a fact, and he accepted it as a closed page, not a twist of fate, but a part of life that could be remembered calmly. The figures of his parents appeared warmer than he expected. His mother reaches out, hands over the chalk. His father twists the wrench. They say nothing. Jack sees their silence by the maple tree where he first learned to judge the wind. He left the token between the flagstones as a sign. Living knowledge continues to teach even those who have already passed beyond the borders of life. He reached up, threw 2 more branches. The sparks rose higher, briefly illuminating the wooden side of the van, where he had penciled in the outline of a cabinet. Amy's project was moving forward. Tomorrow he would begin attaching the frame for the platform bed, leaving room for tools and water. There was no need to rush. The work felt precise, without the worry of getting it done, without the fear of not getting it done. Jack finished his bourbon and felt a slight warmth in his chest. There was no need to move his chair closer to the fire. His body had become accustomed to the cool air, to the smell of smoke. He put his mug on the folding table and sat down on the ground. The soil gave off the heat it had stored during the day. How many miles behind? He stopped counting. The odometer registered numbers, but they did not determine the value of the journey. Jack grinned. Before, he recorded every 100, as if it were proof that he was moving away. Now, 1 mile and 1,000 were perceived the same as one of many steps that did not have a personal value. The main thing was that each one led to what he wanted to build. In his pants pocket was a small folding knife, a gift from Cal. Jack took it out, opened the blade, and carved the word, "Here," into a thin, dry twig. He cut off a piece of the twig and threw it into the fire. The mark disappeared in the heat, but the fact that the word had been carved fixed the thought, to live not in past points or in future expectations, but in the present place, where a column of smoke rises into the starry sky. Jack leaned back on his hands, looking up. The stars grew brighter as the embers fell. The Milky Way was a streak. The air was filled with the soft rustle of desert grass, the wind passing softly between the hills. No one called his name, no thought pulsed with anxiety. There were voices in his head, but they did not disturb the silence. They blended into it like different instruments into one calm melody. He heard Cal again. Hands and minds are equally important. He heard Lori, you're alive. He heard Carol, we're both waiting for things to stop cutting into our palms. He heard Maggie, thank you for what we had. Each sentence retained its form, but it was no longer a jab. The voices sounded like reminders, different but together adding up to one, that you can live without running if you allow yourself to feel, to make mistakes, to correct, to laugh, and to mourn without shame. The embers were covered with a gray lace. Jack stood up, carefully parting the logs so that the flames would last until he had prepared a bed of stones to put out the fire. He switched off the lantern. His eyes had adjusted to the twilight. There was no empty hesitation inside, which used to make him turn the key at 3 in the morning. Now it seemed right to put out the fire, close the door of the van, and leave the night as it was, without the need to hold up a signal light. But first he took off his notebook, sat down on the threshold of the van, and opened to a blank page. The handwriting was even. Today I sat by the fire. I didn't look for directions. The voices of the road are nearby. They don't make noise. I accepted myself unconditionally. Tomorrow I'll wake up and continue building a house on wheels. Not for the sake of leaving. For the sake of space where there will be room for anyone who wants to sit down and say, I'm alive. Jack slammed the notebook shut and placed it on the first shelf. He scooped up some water in a metal mug and poured it onto the coals. The heat hissed and a light steam rose. He waited until there was not a single glowing ember left, then smoothed out the ashes with his boot. The sky grew darker. The van creaked softly as he climbed the steps. Inside, it smelled of new wood and window caulk. Jack closed the side door, turned on the small yellow LED light, and spread out the sleeping bag. He took off his boots and sank down onto the mattress. His heart beat calmly, his breathing even. He felt his body remember today, his steps on the stones, the warmth of the fire, the cold metal of his dog tag in his pocket, the sound of his pen on paper. The eyes closed. The silence was not a void. It was a space in which the voices of days gone by had taken up their places, like the things on the side of a van. Sleep did not have to be summoned. It came of itself, without effort. Outside the door, the night wind blew along the slopes, but inside everything stood firm. Hands and thoughts rested on a new foundation, and the house on wheels began its real, non-running journey. Life went on, without exclamations, without promises, with a steady, calm set of miles that now required no justification. The story has come to an end, but it is only the beginning. There are even more unexpected turns and exciting events ahead. Subscribe to stay up to date with what others can only guess. Like and comment are your connection to the author. See you soon. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.